Hello. Today is Friday, April 11th, and welcome to episode 348 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI fellow Jessica Jones. I'm joined today by three of my favorite female co-hosts. We've got Morgan, we've got Amy, we've got Algene. Thank you, ladies, for joining me on this Friday. So today we're talking about Europe. In the past few days, there have been signals from Washington and the Trump administration that they're questioning the future of U.S. military presence in Europe. Pentagon Review is reportedly weighing the withdrawal of up to 10,000 troops. But we've seen a little pushback. The head of U.S. European Command testified that keeping current troop levels is critical. We've also heard from some congressional leaders as well that troops need to stay where they are. At the same time, European allies like France and UK are exploring frameworks for military assistance, possibly, keeping troops in Ukraine. The European Commission has earmarked 800 billion euros on national and pan-European defense projects, attempting to rid itself of a reliance on U.S. defense manufacturing. Ukraine has also accused China of deploying troops to support Russia. They've allegedly captured two, an allegation Beijing, of course, has denied. And all of this happens as, the Trump administration is kind of weighing what the future of U.S.-European relations, NATO, looks like. Okay, it's a lot to cover. So, Morgan, I'm going to first turn to you. What's going on? Do we think there are going to be troop reductions in Europe, U.S. troop reductions in Europe?
I guess I'm not surprised that the Trump administration comes in and decides to do a force posture review of Europe. That doesn't really shock me. At the same time, though, I do think it is interesting timing, particularly as we've got the Yukon posture hearings this week. In addition to that, Bridge Colby, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, was just confirmed. He is a noted Indo-Pacific junkie. He will always advocate for more resources to the Indo-Pacific. So it doesn't really shock me that, all of a sudden he gets confirmed and boom, we're going to consider moving troops out of Europe so we can free them up for the Indo-Pacific fight with China. So that I don't find it shocking. I do wonder if it's premature, though, these conversations, given that we do have a very hot war right now in Ukraine still, and those negotiations with Russia haven't really gone anywhere thus far. And so I do have reservations about the signal that this sends to Russia. I don't necessarily think it's, a demonstration of an act of good faith. And if we just pull back a little bit, it shows Russia that, we're going to be the good guys and we're non-threatening and we're going to act in good faith and, adhere to any sort of terms of an agreement that we set with them. I don't buy that. I think that's horseshit. But what I do think is that the United States needs to maintain that deterrent, and until we actually see some sort of resolution with Ukraine.
Algene, do you find the timing kind of funky? I mean, Morgan's brought up some things that are happening on the Hill. Like, what have we heard from congressional leaders? And/or is this a negotiation tactic? Is this meant for, President Trump to get more cards in dealing with Russia?
I don't see how it could get more cards. I don't think that in the middle of a ceasefire negotiation, that considering pulling up to 10,000 troops out of the region is a move that would deter Putin. If anything, I think it would encourage him to do even more. I think that it's really telling that, in an era where we're seeing very little Republican congressional pushback to a lot of the actions that Donald Trump is taking, that you're hearing from the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, from the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee saying, look, this is not a good move. This is not something that's going to deter Putin, especially at this time. It's the wrong signal to send, and it's not something that we should be doing. And I really applaud them for really sticking to their guns on that because, yes, Europe should do more. I think we all agree that. But in the middle of a negotiation, signaling that you're going to pull out troops, I don't know how that could be seen as a positive step in the eyes of Putin.
Amy, so, we've heard from the Trump administration and from folks for a long time that Europe needs to do more. And here we are. We have Europeans trying to signaling they're going to spend more on defense. Of course, the EU is, is a difficult system where countries are competing against each other in some ways and trying to act coherently and cohesively in another way. We see these billions of dollars allocated to defense spending. How realistic is Europe stepping up right now, reinvigorating a defense industry base, coming off of American reliance?
Well, I think, we've seen this, and I think we've discussed this in the past couple months since these quote unquote ceasefire negotiations have started, which I just want to chime in that they are really a misnomer at this point because there's been no ceasefire. And Russia continues its assault on Ukraine. Ukraine is essentially standing alone at this point. And the Europeans, once again, have an opportunity to step up to the plate. They have talked about this. They've held meetings over this, but we've seen very little action. So it's really incumbent, I think, on the Europeans to recognize that there has been this shift in U.S. policy, that it's not beyond comprehension that Hegseth and party pull troops out of Europe at this point or reposition them in some way. And Europe has to make a decision, finally. They've talked about peacekeeping forces. They've talked about negotiating a ceasefire on their own. The European Defense Industrial Base has started to see some movement. But again, meaningful steps such as letting Ukraine into the EU have not taken place. So I think Europe needs to have another one of their emergency meetings. Maybe not hold it in France this time. And Britain seems to kind of have our number at this point, and make these decisions and move forward, basically looking at a U.S. that is absent from the continent.
I think to your point, Amy, I think the realization, not just in Europe, but just I think abroad globally, which is not just this is not a temporary Trump administration, that I think the world is a little bit surprised at the animosity, might be a strong word, but the apathy that Americans are feeling towards global engagement. And so it's not temporary, that they need a permanent solutions and strategy to dealing with U.S. disengagement potentially.
Yes.
All right. So that wasn't quite a fun Friday, but we're happy. So thanks to our guests. Thanks. That's a wrap. Thanks so much we don't have Kelly. We've got Taylor here. Thank you, Taylor, for joining us today. Claude Jennings and the NSI team for their help in producing today's episode. Join us again on Monday. Who knows what may happen over the weekend? We've got Iran negotiations, perhaps. So join us to see what we're talking about then. We're up on YouTube, so check out our channel, today's episode. If you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.